How could a vast empire, stretching from the steppes of Mongolia to the heart of Europe and the Middle East, survive and even thrive without the cities and settled infrastructure that most civilizations relied upon? This question challenges our assumptions about what is necessary for human societies to prosper. While most empires of the medieval world were built around fortified cities, permanent trade hubs, and complex bureaucracies, the Mongols forged an empire that seemed to defy these conventions. Their survival and expansion relied not on walls of stone or permanent settlements, but on adaptability, mobility, and a deep understanding of the landscape they inhabited. To comprehend their success, we must first step onto the vast open steppe itself, a land of extremes where life demanded resilience, resourcefulness, and constant movement. The Mongol steppes are not just empty plains. They are a living environment shaped by wind, snow, and the rhythm of the seasons. Water is scarce, and vegetation is spread unevenly across the land. Herds of horses, sheep, goats, and camels are the lifeblood of survival, providing meat, milk, hides, and transport. For the Mongols, the steppe dictated the pace and structure of life. Unlike city dwellers, whose routines were largely fixed by markets, workshops, and governance, the Mongols' lives were cyclical and migratory. Their settlements were impermanent, consisting of yurts, portable tents made from felt and wood that could be dismantled, carried, and reassembled with relative ease. This mobility was not a convenience, it was a necessity. It allowed them to follow pasture for their animals, avoid harsh weather, and adapt to the unpredictable availability of resources. Central to this way of life was the horse, a creature that was far more than a means of transportation. The Mongol horse was small, hardy, and remarkably resilient, capable of enduring long journeys over unforgiving terrain. A mounted warrior could travel hundreds of miles in a week, carrying not only himself but his weapons, supplies, and even other companions if needed. This mobility made the Mongols extraordinarily difficult to pin down. Their enemies, often anchored in fortified cities or slow-moving armies, could not match the speed and flexibility of Mongol forces. Yet survival on the steppe demanded more than speed. It required knowledge of the land, the seasons, and the animals. Mongol children learned from an early age how to ride, herd, and navigate the plains. They understood which grasses would support livestock at different times of year, where water could be found in dry seasons, and how to read the wind and sky for incoming weather. This intimate relationship with the environment was a survival strategy as crucial as any weapon. Mobility alone, however, does not explain the Mongols' remarkable ability to organize vast territories and populations. They developed systems that allowed them to maintain cohesion across distances that would baffle most empires. One key innovation was the relay of communication through mounted couriers and a network of way stations known as yam. These stations, stocked with horses and supplies, allowed messages to travel rapidly across thousands of miles. Orders from the Great Khan could reach distant units within days, a feat unmatched in contemporary Europe or the Middle East. This system also facilitated trade, intelligence gathering, and logistical support, enabling the Mongols to project power without relying on permanent urban centers. Their governance was less about imposing physical structures and more about creating networks of information, allegiance, and discipline. Diet and sustenance on the move were another critical aspect of Mongol survival. Unlike city dwellers, who depended on grain stores, markets, and complex supply chains, the Mongols relied heavily on livestock. Meat, milk, cheese, and fermented mare's milk (erag) provided essential calories and nutrients. Herding practices were carefully timed to ensure that animals had adequate pasture and that food sources remained sustainable throughout the year. The Mongols also practiced a form of preservation that allowed them to store dried meat and dairy products for long journeys. This reliance on self-contained portable food sources meant that their movements were not limited by supply lines in the way that sedentary armies often were. Even during campaigns, Mongol forces could sustain themselves, reducing dependence on conquered territories or pillaged cities. The social organization of the Mongols reinforced their ability to survive without cities. Society was structured around clans and tribes, which were, in turn, organized into units that could be combined for larger military or administrative purposes. Loyalty to kin and the larger confederation of the Mongol nation created a social cohesion that did not require permanent infrastructure. Leadership was flexible, yet disciplined. The Great Khan and his generals could issue commands that were respected and executed across vast distances. Within this framework, merit and capability often mattered more than birth or wealth. A skilled warrior or strategist could rise through the ranks, ensuring that the system rewarded competence, a key factor in maintaining effective operations without the stabilizing presence of urban centers. Trade and diplomacy also played a crucial role in sustaining the Mongols. While they did not require cities for survival, they understood their strategic importance for expanding influence and obtaining resources. The Mongols actively engaged with neighboring civilizations, forging alliances, establishing trade routes, and sometimes offering protection to merchants in exchange for goods. They facilitated the movement of silk, spices, metals, and other commodities across Eurasia. These networks were not dependent on the Mongols building cities themselves. Rather, they leveraged existing urban centers within the territories they controlled, extracting value while maintaining their own nomadic lifestyle. This approach allowed them to enjoy the benefits of civilization, economic exchange, cultural knowledge, and technology, without being tied down by its constraints. Climate and geography also shaped Mongol survival strategies. Harsh winters, hot summers, and unpredictable weather patterns demanded a flexible approach to habitation and movement. The Mongols' mobility allowed them to avoid the worst extremes of climate, moving herds to better grazing lands or avoiding floods, snowstorms, and droughts. Their clothing and portable shelters were designed for adaptability, allowing them to endure conditions that might devastate a stationary population. Even warfare was adapted to these environmental realities. Mongol armies could strike during winter when enemies were unprepared or retreat to favorable terrain when necessary. The steppe itself became both shield and tool, offering strategic advantages to those who understood its rhythms. Cultural and spiritual practices reinforced resilience. Mongol traditions emphasized harmony with nature, respect for animals, and the importance of communal effort. Storytelling, oral history, and practical education ensured that knowledge of survival techniques, seasonal patterns, and military strategy was passed down through generations. These practices were not just cultural artifacts, they were practical methods of preserving life and sustaining the community in an environment where missteps could be fatal. The combination of practical knowledge, mobility, and social cohesion created a system capable of sustaining large populations over vast, resource-sparse landscapes. The Mongols also demonstrated extraordinary adaptability in integrating conquered peoples and technologies into their empire. While they did not build permanent cities of their own in the steppe heartland, they valued the administrative skills, artisans, engineers, and scholars from urban civilizations. These individuals could provide expertise in areas where the Mongols themselves were less experienced, such as siege warfare, metallurgy, or bureaucratic governance. Yet even in these cases, the Mongols maintained their core nomadic lifestyle, using city dwellers as resources rather than as foundations for permanent settlement. This selective adoption allowed the Mongols to expand their influence without compromising the very mobility that had allowed them to survive and flourish in the first place. Ultimately, the survival of the Mongols without cities was not a matter of luck, but of deliberate strategy and profound understanding of their environment. Their empire challenged conventional wisdom about civilization, showing that human societies could thrive without the trappings of permanence and stone. By relying on mobility, self-sufficiency, flexible social structures, and intimate knowledge of the land, the Mongols created a networked, resilient society capable of withstanding extreme conditions, internal challenges, and external threats. The lessons of the steppe, honed over centuries, allowed them not only to survive but to become one of the most formidable empires in history. Even as historians and anthropologists study the Mongol Empire, the question persists: how did they maintain cohesion, project power, and achieve long-term survival while eschewing permanent settlements? The answer lies in a combination of factors that intersected seamlessly: environmental adaptation, social organization, mobility, and strategic integration of external resources. The Mongols turned what many would consider a disadvantage, lack of cities, into a defining strength. Their empire was a living organism, constantly in motion, capable of responding to threats and opportunities alike. In this light, the steppe was not a barrier to civilization but a crucible, shaping a people uniquely suited to thrive without the conventional anchors of settled life. And yet, even as they mastered survival on the open plains, the Mongols were forced to confront new challenges as their empire expanded into territories dominated by cities, rivers, and fortifications, testing the limits of their nomadic strategies and pushing them to innovate in ways that would echo across continents. As the Mongol Empire expanded beyond the steppes, its people encountered regions dominated by established cities, cultivated lands, and dense populations. These environments presented challenges unfamiliar to a society structured around mobility and self-sufficiency. Unlike the open plains, urban centers required new methods of administration, diplomacy, and logistical planning. The Mongols approached these challenges with pragmatic flexibility, integrating conquered populations and technologies without abandoning their nomadic roots. They recognized that while cities were not essential to their identity or survival, they were invaluable tools for consolidating power, accessing resources, and projecting influence across Eurasia. The administrative genius of the Mongols lay in their ability to adapt without fundamentally altering their way of life. When they conquered a city or a settled region, they often left existing governance structures intact, appointing local leaders to manage day-to-day affairs under the oversight of Mongol authorities. Tribute, taxes, and labor obligations were collected systematically, yet the Mongols rarely imposed direct control in a manner that would require permanent relocation of their own people. This approach ensured stability and continuity while minimizing disruption to Mongol mobility. Their oversight was rigorous, facilitated by an extensive courier system that relayed messages, reports, and instructions across vast distances. In essence, the Mongols created a hybrid governance model that combined the advantages of urban administration with the freedoms of a nomadic society. Military strategy remained central to the Mongols' success in urbanized regions. While the steppe favored rapid, mounted maneuvers, sieges and occupations demanded different techniques. The Mongols were adept at incorporating engineers, siege experts, and artisans from conquered civilizations to overcome city walls, fortified gates, and defensive moats. They valued knowledge over tradition, often employing Chinese engineers for complex siege engines or Persian administrators for tax collection and record-keeping. Even in cities, Mongol forces maintained a degree of mobility, avoiding permanent encampments unless strategically necessary. Their armies were not tied to a single location, allowing them to respond quickly to uprisings, supply shortages, or rival armies, and to redeploy across the empire with remarkable speed. Trade and commerce became a cornerstone of Mongol expansion into urbanized territories. The empire's vastness connected Europe, Central Asia, the Middle East, and East Asia, creating unprecedented opportunities for exchange. The Mongols understood that facilitating trade would strengthen their control and enrich their people without forcing them into city life. They protected trade routes, regulated merchants, and offered safe passage across regions that might otherwise be perilous. Silk, spices, metals, and artisans traveled alongside Mongol armies, spreading not only goods but ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. These exchanges bolstered the empire's cohesion and influence, and they demonstrated that survival and prosperity could be achieved through networks of mobility and commerce, rather than through the accumulation of urban infrastructure. The Mongols' interactions with urban populations also reflected their adaptability in social and cultural terms. While the steppes demanded intimate knowledge of animal husbandry and seasonal cycles, cities required negotiation with diverse communities, religious groups, and professional classes. The Mongols were remarkably tolerant and pragmatic in these matters. They allowed religious freedom, incorporated local customs, and often adopted beneficial practices from conquered peoples. This approach reinforced loyalty and reduced the likelihood of rebellion, while simultaneously granting the Mongols access to skills and knowledge. Beyond their traditional expertise, by remaining culturally flexible, they could extract value from cities while avoiding the constraints of urban life for themselves. Communication and intelligence continued to be a defining feature of Mongol survival. The empire's expansion relied on timely and accurate information, both for military campaigns and administrative governance. The Yam system, with its network of relay stations and mounted couriers, extended into newly conquered territories, linking distant cities, fortresses, and nomadic units. Information could traverse thousands of miles in days, enabling the Great Khan and his generals to coordinate complex operations with remarkable precision. The Mongols' emphasis on communication allowed them to integrate cities into their empire without sacrificing the mobility and self-reliance that had defined their culture. It also allowed them to monitor local conditions, respond to threats, and make strategic decisions in near real time, a capability unmatched by most contemporary empires. The Mongols' approach to urban conquest also included careful management of resources. Unlike sedentary rulers who relied on permanent stockpiles and infrastructure, the Mongols emphasized strategic use of local wealth and materials. Cities offered access to grain, artisans, and manufactured goods, which could support Mongol armies and populations without requiring permanent settlement. This flexibility enabled the Mongols to conduct campaigns across continents without overextending supply lines or compromising their nomadic identity. Even when stationed in or near cities, Mongol leaders and warriors maintained portable equipment, yurts, and livestock, ensuring that they could depart or redeploy at a moment's notice. Their society remained anchored in mobility, using cities as operational hubs rather than permanent homes. Religious and intellectual engagement also flourished under Mongol rule. The empire became a conduit for the exchange of ideas, philosophies, and technologies across Eurasia. Scholars, craftsmen, and religious leaders traveled within the empire, often with the protection and support of Mongol authorities. The Mongols themselves, though primarily focused on practical concerns, demonstrated curiosity and adaptability, adopting innovations such as gunpowder technology from China or irrigation methods from Central Asia. Their openness facilitated cultural synthesis while maintaining the structural advantages of nomadic life. Cities served as nodes for learning and innovation, yet the Mongols' strength remained rooted in their capacity for movement, strategic oversight, and environmental adaptation. Environmental management continued to be a central consideration. While cities provided concentrated resources, they also required careful regulation to prevent shortages, disease, or social unrest. The Mongols applied lessons from the steppe to these settings, emphasizing sustainability, observation, and flexibility. They understood that over-reliance on a single urban center could become a vulnerability. By dispersing their forces, maintaining mobility, and balancing urban and rural interactions, they minimized risks and ensured resilience. This approach allowed them to control diverse regions, from river valleys to mountain passes, without compromising the survival strategies honed on the open plains. The Mongols' survival without cities also influenced their diplomatic practices. Envoys and emissaries traveled swiftly across the empire and beyond, negotiating alliances, treaties, and trade agreements. These interactions relied on the Mongols' reputation for reliability, discipline, and military might, rather than the presence of administrative capitals. Their diplomatic reach extended across cultures and continents, enabling the Mongols to secure strategic advantages, integrate conquered territories, and facilitate commerce without the trappings of permanent settlement. In effect, diplomacy became an extension of their nomadic survival strategies, using networks, relationships, and mobility rather than fixed infrastructure to achieve stability and prosperity. Even in their encounters with the natural world, the Mongols maintained the principles that had guided them for centuries. Conquered lands were used strategically, with pasture lands preserved for livestock and agricultural regions exploited selectively to support armies and populations. The Mongols' intimate knowledge of terrain allowed them to exploit resources efficiently, move without overtaxing the environment, and avoid ecological collapse. This ecological intelligence, developed over generations on the steppe, was applied in new contexts, demonstrating the adaptability that underpinned the empire's endurance. They understood that survival depended on balance between mobility and settlement, exploitation and conservation, urban integration and nomadic freedom. The empire's cohesion and resilience were reinforced by a shared sense of identity and purpose. Despite the vast distances and diversity of peoples under Mongol rule, common practices, military discipline, and respect for hierarchical command structures ensured coordination and loyalty. Mongol leaders emphasized meritocracy, rewarding skill, bravery, and strategic thinking. This reinforced effectiveness both in the field and in governance, ensuring that the absence of cities did not translate into disorganization or weakness. Instead, the Mongols created a networked society where information, resources, and authority flowed seamlessly across a vast, often inhospitable landscape. As the Mongols extended their reach into the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and China, they encountered challenges that demanded continuous innovation. Their traditional nomadic practices had to be adapted to diverse climates, agricultural systems, and urban densities. Yet their fundamental strategies, mobility, adaptability, environmental intelligence, and strategic integration remained intact. Cities were leveraged as tools, not as foundations. Local populations provided expertise and resources, while the Mongols maintained their core identity as mobile, resilient, and highly disciplined people. In this way, the Mongol Empire demonstrated that the essence of civilization need not be tied to stone walls, paved streets, or permanent urban centers. Mobility, strategic organization, and adaptability could achieve similar ends on an even larger scale. Even as historians examine the Mongols' successes, it becomes clear that their survival and prosperity without cities was the result of a sophisticated interplay of social, environmental, military, and economic strategies. By combining nomadic flexibility with strategic engagement in urban and settled regions, the Mongols created a durable empire capable of sustaining itself across continents and centuries. Their model challenged conventional ideas about urbanization, permanence, and the requirements of civilization. The empire's longevity and influence attest to the effectiveness of a system rooted not in permanence, but in movement, adaptability, and an extraordinary understanding of both people and landscape. The Mongols' influence extended far beyond the immediate territories they controlled. Their empire reshaped trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange across Eurasia in ways that endured long after the decline of their political dominance. The absence of permanent cities within their core nomadic regions did not limit their impact. Rather, it amplified it, allowing the Mongols to act as a connective force between civilizations, linking the wealth of China, the innovation of the Islamic world, and the emerging economies of Europe. By facilitating unprecedented mobility of goods, people, and ideas, the Mongols effectively created a proto-global network, one that relied on adaptability and movement rather than fixed urban infrastructure. One of the most remarkable legacies of the Mongols is the extent to which they standardized and protected trade across their empire. The famous Silk Road, previously a perilous route marked by bandits, political fragmentation, and unpredictable climates, became safer and more reliable under Mongol control. Merchants traveled vast distances with the assurance that their caravans would be protected and their goods respected. This security was achieved not through permanent garrisons or city walls, but through the disciplined organization of Mongol cavalry, rapid communication systems, and a reputation for enforcing order. The mobility that had been central to survival on the steppe became a mechanism for sustaining commerce, ensuring that the empire could thrive economically without relying on permanent settlements. The transmission of knowledge was another lasting effect of Mongol expansion. Scholars, artisans, and engineers moved across the empire, carrying innovations in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering. Cities in China, Persia, and the Middle East became hubs of intellectual activity, yet the Mongols themselves did not need to reside permanently in these centers to benefit from them. They absorbed and applied this knowledge strategically, integrating foreign technologies into military campaigns, governance, and infrastructure projects. Gunpowder, siege engines, irrigation techniques, and record-keeping methods all traveled along the routes facilitated by Mongol mobility. In this way, the empire functioned as both a nomadic network and a conduit for the exchange of ideas, allowing cultures to influence each other without the necessity of permanent urban habitation by the Mongols themselves. Cultural exchange under Mongol rule was not limited to material innovations. Religious and artistic traditions spread widely across the empire, often blending with local practices to create new syntheses. Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and shamanistic traditions all coexisted under Mongol oversight, benefiting from the empire's tolerance and strategic encouragement of diversity. Artists, translators, and scholars moved freely, producing manuscripts, architectural projects, and works of art that reflected the interconnectedness of Eurasia. The Mongols' nomadic way of life paradoxically became a stabilizing factor for cultural transmission. Their mobility allowed them to interact with multiple regions, observe and adopt beneficial practices, and maintain networks of communication and trade that made cultural flourishing possible across vast distances. The Mongols also left an enduring mark on military strategy and organization. Their emphasis on speed, communication, and coordination transformed the way armies operated. The principles developed on the steppe, Rapid deployment, strategic intelligence, psychological warfare, and flexible command structures were applied effectively in both rural and urban contexts. Even when confronting heavily fortified cities or professional armies, Mongol forces leveraged mobility and integration of conquered expertise to achieve remarkable results. The lessons of the steppe informed their campaigns in diverse terrains, from the mountains of Central Asia to the plains of Eastern Europe, allowing the Mongols to maintain cohesion, project power, and sustain influence over territories far larger than those managed by sedentary empires. Despite their successes, the Mongols faced challenges that tested the limits of their nomadic strategies. Governing large urbanized populations required continuous adaptation, and environmental pressures occasionally constrained mobility. Disease, climatic extremes, and resistance from conquered peoples forced Mongol leaders to innovate, balancing the freedom of nomadic life with the demands of empire. Their ability to navigate these challenges highlights a central theme of Mongol society. Survival depended on flexibility, observation, and strategic integration rather than adherence to fixed structures or urban permanence. By responding pragmatically to shifting conditions, the Mongols ensured that their empire could endure even in the face of extraordinary complexity. Economic. Sustainability under Mongol rule relied on both mobility and selective engagement with settled regions. The empire's wealth was derived from tribute, trade, and access to local resources. Yet Mongols themselves remained largely self-sufficient, relying on herding, portable food, and adaptable logistics. Cities were incorporated into the empire as strategic assets, not as centers of daily Mongol life. This approach allowed the empire to benefit from urban wealth and expertise without compromising the advantages of mobility. Even military campaigns were designed with this principle in mind. Supply lines were flexible, forces could forage or requisition resources when necessary, and strategic withdrawals were as important as advances. The Mongols' ability to balance these competing demands was a defining characteristic of their enduring success. Environmental stewardship was integral to long-term survival. While the Mongols are often remembered for their military conquests, their understanding of terrain, climate, and resource cycles was equally important. Pasture lands were managed to sustain livestock populations, rivers and water sources were monitored for availability, and seasonal patterns guided migration, settlement, and campaign planning. This ecological intelligence extended into conquered territories, where the Mongols applied lessons from the steppe to maintain balance between exploitation and conservation. The combination of environmental knowledge, mobility, and strategic use of cities allowed the Mongols to sustain large populations and armies without the need for permanent urban infrastructure, demonstrating a sophisticated approach to resource management. The social and cultural cohesion of the Mongol Empire was reinforced by shared values, disciplined organization, and meritocratic principles. Leaders were selected for competence, warriors for skill, and administrators for effectiveness. Loyalty to the Great Khan and adherence to Mongol codes of conduct ensured coordination and discipline across vast distances. Oral traditions, storytelling, and practical education transmitted knowledge critical to survival and success, reinforcing collective memory and strategic insight. These mechanisms substituted for the stabilizing functions that cities typically provide, creating a networked society in which mobility, expertise, and communication formed the backbone of civilization. The Mongols' legacy is evident in the ways that mobility, adaptability, and strategic integration influenced subsequent empires and societies. Their approach challenged assumptions about the necessity of cities for political, economic, or cultural development. By demonstrating that empire could function without fixed urban centers, the Mongols expanded the conceptual boundaries of civilization. Trade networks flourished, ideas crossed continents, and technology spread more widely than ever before. The lessons of the steppe, resilience, flexibility, environmental awareness, and mobility offered an alternative model for sustaining large populations and projecting power, one that relied on movement rather than permanence. Even in the centuries following the decline of Mongol political dominance, the imprint of their strategies remained visible. Formerly Mongol-ruled regions retained trade networks, administrative practices, and military innovations introduced during the empire's height. The Mongols' approach to governance, integration of diverse populations, and facilitation of cultural exchange set precedents that influenced neighboring states and emerging powers. The principle that mobility and adaptability could substitute for permanent urban infrastructure continued to resonate, informing both military strategy and administrative theory in regions across Eurasia. Ultimately, the story of the Mongols illustrates the remarkable capacity of human societies to survive, thrive, and innovate in environments that might appear inhospitable or unconventional. Their empire demonstrates that permanence is not a prerequisite for prosperity, and that mobility, environmental intelligence, and strategic integration can form the foundation of civilization. Cities, while valuable, were tools rather than necessities. The Mongols' ability to harness both nomadic freedom and urban resources allowed them to achieve a scale and influence unmatched by most contemporary powers. By turning the limitations of their environment into advantages, they created a society that was flexible, resilient, and profoundly interconnected. The Mongols' experience challenges modern assumptions about urbanization, stability, and progress. While much of human history is framed around the rise of cities, the Mongol Empire serves as a powerful reminder that survival and success can be achieved through alternative models. Mobility, knowledge of the environment, disciplined organization, and strategic engagement with diverse populations can sustain societies at a continental scale. The lessons of the steppe resonate beyond history, offering insights into resilience, adaptability, and the ways humans can thrive in challenging or dynamic landscapes. In embracing the principles that had guided them for centuries, the Mongols demonstrated that civilization is not defined solely by cities, walls, or permanent infrastructure, but by the capacity to endure, innovate, and connect across vast and varied worlds. The story of the Mongols ultimately illuminates the broader possibilities of human organization and survival. Their empire was a testament to the power of adaptability, demonstrating that a society need not conform to conventional patterns to achieve greatness. By thriving without cities, the Mongols redefined what it meant to govern, to trade, to innovate, and to maintain cohesion across diverse and often hostile landscapes. Their example challenges the conventional wisdom of civilization, highlighting the extraordinary potential of mobility, environmental mastery, and strategic foresight. The Mongols' achievements endure not only in the historical record, but in the ongoing understanding of human resilience and ingenuity, offering a vision of society in which movement, flexibility, and adaptability are as foundational as walls and streets ever were.